Chapter 8. Sabriel awoke to a soft candlelight, the warmth of a feather bed, and silken sheets, delightfully smooth under heavy blankets. A fire burned briskly in a red brick fireplace, and paneled walls gleamed with the dark mystery of well-polished mahogany. A blue-papered ceiling with silver stars dusted across it faced her newly opened eyes. Two windows confronted each other across the room, but they were shuttered, so Sabriel had no idea what time it was, no more than she had any remembrance of how she had got there. It was definitely Abhorsen's house, but her memory was of fainting on the doorstep. Gingerly, for even her neck ached from her day and night of travel, fear, and flight, Sabriel lifted her head to look around and once again met the green eyes of the cat that was not a cat. The creature was lying near her feet at the end of the bed. What are you? Sabriel asked nervously, suddenly all too aware that she was naked under the soft sheets, a sensacious delight, but a defenseless one. Her eyes flickered to her sword belt and bell bandolier, carefully draped on a clothes horse near the door. I have a variety of names, replied the cat. It had a strange voice, half mew, half purr, with hissing on the vowels. You may call me a Mugget. As to what I am, I was once many things, but now I am only several. Primarily, I'm a servant of Abhorsen, unless you would be kind enough to remove this collar. Sabriel gave an uneasy smile and shook her head firmly. Whatever Mogget was, that collar was the only thing that kept it as a servant of Abhorsen, or anybody else. The charter marks on the collar were quite explicit about that. As far as Sabriel could tell, the binding spell was over 1,000 years old. It was quite possible that Mogget was some free magic spirit, as old as the wall, or even older. She wondered why her father hadn't mentioned it, and with a pang wished that she had awoken to find her father here, in his house, both their troubles over. I thought not, said Mogget, combing a careless shrug with a limbering stretch. It, or he, for Sabriel felt the cat was definitely masculine, jumped to the parquet floor and sauntered over to the fire. Sabriel watched, her trained eye noting that Mogget's shadow was not always that of a cat. A knock at the door interrupted her study of the cat, a sharp sound making Sabriel jump nervously, and the hair on the back of her neck frizzing to attention. It's only one of the servants, Mogget said in a patronizing tone. Charter sendings, and pretty low-grade ones at that. They always burn the milk. Sabriel ignored him and said, Come in. Her voice shook, and realized her shaky nerves and weakness would be with her for a while. The door swung open silently, and a short, robed figure drifted in. It was similar to the upper gate warden, being cowled, and so without a visible face. But this one's habit was of light cream rather than black. It had a simple cotton underdress draped over one arm, a thick towel over the other, and its charter-woven hands held a long woolen surcoat and a pair of slippers. Without a word, it went to the end of the bed and put the garments on Sabriel's feet. Then it crossed to a porcelain basin that sat in a silver filigree stand, above a tiled area of the floor to the left of the fire. There, it twisted a bronze wheel, and steaming hot water splashed and gurgled from a pipe in the wall, bringing with it the stench of something sulphurous and unpleasant. Sabriel wrinkled her nose. "Hot springs," commented Mogget. "You won't smell it after a while. Your father always said that having permanent hot water was worth bearing the smell. Or was that your grandfather who said that? Or great-great-aunt? Ah, memory." The servant stood immobile while the basin filled, then twisted the wheel to cut the flow as water slopped over the rim to the floor, close to Mogget, who leapt to his feet and padded away, keeping a cautious distance from the charter sending. Just like a real cat, Sabriel thought. Perhaps the imposing shape impressed behavior, too, over the years, or centuries. She liked cats. The school had a cat, a plump, marmalade feline, who went by the name of Biscuits. Sabriel thought about it, the way it slept on the windowsill on the prefect's room, and then found herself thinking about the school in general, and what her friends would be doing. Her eyelids drooped as she imagined an adequate class, and the mistress droning on about silver slatters. A sharp clang woke her with yet another start, sending further slabs of pain through tired muscles. The charter sending had tapped the bronze wheel with the poker from the fireplace. It was obviously impatient for Sabriel to have her wash. "Water's getting cold," explained Mogget, leaping up to the bed again. "And then be serving dinner in half an hour." "They?" asked Sabriel, sitting up and reaching forward to grab slippers and towel. Preparatory to sliding out of bed and into them. "Them," said Mogget, butting his head in the direction of the sending, who had stepped back from the basin and was now holding out a bar of soap. Sabriel shuffled over to the basin, the towel wrapped firmly around her, and gingerly touched the water. It was delightfully hot. But before she could do anything with it, the sending stepped forward, whisked the towel off of her, and upended the whole basin over her head. Sabriel shrieked, but, again, before she could do anything else, the sending had put back the basin, turned the wheel for more hot water, and was soaping her down, paying particular attention to her head, as if it wanted to get soap in Sabriel's eyes, or suspected an infestation of nits. "What are you doing?" Sabriel protested, as the strangely cold hands of the sending scrubbed her back, and then, quite without interest, at her breast and stomach. "Stop it! I'm quite old enough to wash myself, thank you." But Miss Prione's techniques for dealing with domestic servants didn't seem to work on domestic sendings. It kept scrubbing, occasionally tipping hot water over Sabriel. "How do I stop it?" she sputtered to Mogget, as still more water cascaded over her, and the sending started to scrub lower regions. "You can't," replied Mogget, who seemed quite amused by the spectacle. "This one's particularly recalcitrant." "What do you— Ow! Stop that! What do you mean, this one?" "There's lots about the place," said Mogget. "Every Abhorsen seems to have made their own, probably because they get like this one after a few 100 years. Privileged family retainers, who always think they know best. Practically human, in the worst way possible." The sending paused in its scrubbing just long enough to flick some water at Mogget, who jumped the wrong way and yowled as it hit him. Just before another great basin load of water hit Sabriel, she saw the cat shoot under the bed and tail dividing the bedspread. "That's enough, thank you," she proclaimed, as the last drench of water drained out through a grill in the tiled area. The sending had probably finished anyway, thought Sabriel, as it stopped washing and started to towel her dry. She snatched the towel back from it and tried to finish the job herself, but the sending counterattacked by combing her hair, causing another minor tussle. Eventually, between the two of them, Sabriel shrugged on the undercoat and surcoat and submitted to a manicure and vigorous hair-brushing. She was admiring the tiny, repeated silver key motif on the black surcoat in the mirror that backed one of the window shutters when a gong sounded somewhere else in the house, and the servant sending opened the door. A split second later, Mogget raced through with a cry that Sabriel thought was "Dinner!" She followed, rather more sedately, the sending, closing the door behind her. Dinner was in the main hall of the house, and a long stately room that took up half the ground floor and was dominated by the floor-to-ceiling stained glass window at the western end. The window showed a scene from the building of the wall, and, like many other things around the house, it was heavily laden with charter magic. Perhaps there was no real glass in it at all, Sabriel mused, as she watched the light of the evening sun play in and around the toiling figures that were building the wall. As with the sendings, if she looked closely enough, you could see tiny charter marks making up the patterns. It was hard to see through the window, but judging from the sun, it was almost dusk. Sabriel realized she must have slept for a full day, or possibly even 2. A table nearly as long as the hall stretched away from her, a brightly polished table of some light and lustrous timber, heavily laden with silver salt cellars, candelabra, and rather fantastic-looking decanters and covered dishes. But only 2 places were fully set, with a plethora of knives, forks, spoons, and other instruments, which Sabriel only recognized from obscure drawings in her etiquette textbook. She'd never seen a real golden straw for sucking the innards out of a pomegranate before, for example. One place was before a high-backed chair at the head of the table, and the other was to the left of this, in front of a cushioned stool. Sabriel wondered which was hers until Mogget jumped up on the stool and said, "Come on! They won't serve till you're seated." They were more sendings, 6 in all, including a cream-dressed tyrant of the bedroom. They were all basically the same, human in shape, but cowled and veiled. Only their hands were visible, and these were almost transparent, as if charter marks had been lightly etched on prosthetic hands carved from moonstone. The sendings stood grouped around a door, the kitchen door, for Sabriel saw fires beyond them and smelled the tang of cooking and stared at her. It was rather unnerving not to meet any eyes. "Yes, that's her," Mogget said cascadically. "Your new mistress, now. Let's have dinner. None of the sendings moved, till Sabriel stepped forward. They stepped forward, too, and all dropped to one knee, or whatever supported them beneath their full-length robes. Each held out their pale right hand, charter marks running bright trails around their palms and fingers. Sabriel stared for a moment, but it was clear they offered their services or loyalty, and expected her to do something in return. She walked to them and gently pressed each upthrust hand in turn, feeling the charter spells that made them whole. Mogget, who spoken truly, for some of the spells were old, far older than Sabriel could guess. "I thank you," she said slowly, "on behalf of my father, and for the kindness you have shown me." This seemed to be appropriate, or enough to be going on with. The sending stood, bowed, and went about their business. The one in the cream habit pulled out Sabriel's chair, and placed her napkin as she sat. It was of crisp black linen, dusted with tiny silver keys, a miracle of needlework. Mogget, Sabriel noted, had a plain white napkin with evidence of old stains. "I've had to eat in the kitchen for the last 2 weeks, Mogget said sourly, as 2 sendings approached from the kitchen, bearing plates that signaled their arrival with the tantalizing odor of spices and hot food. "I expect it was good for you," Sabriel replied brightly, taking a mouthful of wine. It was a fruity, dry, white wine, though Sabriel hadn't developed a palate to know whether it was good or merely indifferent. It was certainly drinkable. Her first major experiments with alcohol lay several years behind her, enshrined in memory as significant occasions shared with 2 of her closest friends. None of the 3 could ever drink brandy again, but Sabriel had started to enjoy wine with her meals. "Anyway, how did you know I was coming?" Sabriel asked. "I didn't know myself till Father sent his message." The cat didn't answer at once. His attention focused on the plate of fish the sending had just put down. Small, almost circular fish, with the bright eyes and shiny scales of the freshly caught. Sabriel had them too, but hers were grilled with a tomato and garlic and basil sauce. "I have served 10 times as many of your forebears as you have years," Mogget replied at last. "And though my powers wane with the ebb of time, I always know when one Abhorsen falls and another takes its place." Sabriel swallowed her last mouthful, all taste gone, and put down her fork. She took a mouthful of wine to clear her throat, but it seemed to have become vinegar, making her cough. "What do you mean by fall? What did you know? What has happened to my father?" Mogget looked up at Sabriel, eyes half-lidded, meeting her gaze steadily, as no normal cat could. "He is dead, Sabriel. Even if he hasn't passed the final gate, he will walk in life no more. That is—" "No!" interrupted Sabriel. "He can't be. He cannot be. He is a necromancer. He can't be dead." "That is why he sent the sword and bells to you, as his aunt sent them to him in her time," Mogget continued, ignoring Sabriel's outburst. "And he was not a necromancer. He was Abhorsen." "I do not understand," Sabriel whispered. She couldn't face Mogget's eyes any more. "I don't know. I don't know enough about anything. The old kingdom, charter magic, even my own father. Why do you say his name as if it were a title?" "It is," He was a Abhorsen. Now you are. Sabriel digested this in silence, staring at the swirls of fish and sauce on her plate, silver scales and red tomato blurring into a pattern of swords and fire. The table blurred too, and the room beyond. She felt herself reaching for the border with death. But try as she might, she couldn't cross it. She sensed it, but there was no way to cross in either direction. Abhorsen's house was too well protected, but she did feel something at the border. Inimical things lurked there. Inimical things lurked there, waiting for her to cross. But there was also the faintest thread of something familiar, like the scent of a woman's perfume after she had left the room, or the waif of a particular pipe tobacco around a corner. Sabriel focused on it and threw herself once more at the barrier that separated her from death, only to be ricocheted back into life. As sharp claws pricked her arm, her eyes snapped open, blinking off flakes of frost to see Mogget, fur bristling, one paw ready to strike again. "Fool!" he hissed. "You are the only one who can break the wards of this house, and they wait for you to do so." Sabriel stared at the angry cat, unseeing, biting back a sharp and proud retort as she realized the truth in Mogget's words. There were dead spirits waiting, and probably the mordicant who would cross as well, and she would have faced them alone and weaponless. "I'm sorry," she muttered, bowing her head into two frosted hands. She hadn't felt this stupidly awful since she'd burned one of her headmistress's rose bushes with an uncontrolled charter spell, narrowly missing the school's ancient and most loved gardener. She had cried then, but she was older now, and she could keep the tears at bay. "Father is not yet truly dead," she said, after a moment. "I felt his presence. Though he is trapped beyond many gates, I could bring him back." "You must not," said Sabriel firmly, and his voice now seemed to carry all the weight of centuries. "You are Abhorsen, and must put the dead to rest. Your path is chosen." "I can walk a different path," Sabriel replied firmly, raising her head. Mogget seemed about to protest again. Then he laughed, a sadistic laugh, and jumped back to the stool. "Do as you will," he said. "Why should I gainsay you? I am but a slave, bound by service. Why would I weep if Abhorsen falls to evil? It is your father who will curse you, and your mother too, and the dead who will be merry." "I don't think he's dead," Sabriel said, bright blushes of a withheld emotion in her pallid cheeks, frost melting, trickling down around her face. "His spirit felt alive. He is trapped in death, I think, but his body lives. Would I still be reviled if I brought him back then?" "No," said Sabriel calmly. "No," said Mogget, calm again. "But he has sent the sword and bells, and you only wishing that he lives." "I feel it," Sabriel said simply, "and I must find out if my feeling is true." "Perhaps it is so, though strange," Mogget seemed to be musing to himself, his voice a soft half-purr. "I have grown dull. This collar strangles me, chokes my wits." "Help me, Mogget," Sabriel suddenly pleaded, reaching over to touch her hand to the cat's head, scratching under the collar. I need to know so much." Mogget purred under the scratching, but as Sabriel leaned close, She could hear the faint peal of the tiny Sereneth bell cut through the purr, and she was reminded that Mogget was no cat, but a free magic creature. For a moment, Sabriel wondered what Mogget's true shape was, and his true nature.
I am the servant of Abhorsen,
Mogget said at last.
and you are Abhorsen, so I must help you. But you must promise that you will not raise your father if his body is dead. Truly, he would not wish it.
I cannot, but I will not act without much thought, and I will listen to you, if you are by me.
I guessed as much, Mogget said, twisting his head away from Sabriel's hand. It is true that you are sadly ignorant. Or you would promise with a will. Your father would never have sent you beyond the wall.
Why did he? Asked Sabriel, her heart suddenly leaping with the question that had been with her all her school days. A question that always smiled away with one word: necessity.
He was afraid, replied Mogget, turning his attention back to the fish. You were safer in Ancestia.
What was he afraid of?
Eat your fish,
replied Mogget, as two sendings appeared from the kitchen, bearing what obviously the next course.
We'll talk later, in the study.